Greetings, parish orphans and retrogrades. Happy first Saturday of July as we prepare for the 4th of July in this fallen republic on its getting old birthday here in the United States of America, AD 2022. Today, as part of my promise, we're following up on the Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health, overturn of Roe versus Wade. And I brought along a friend, Dr. Damon Cudahy. Thanks for being with us, Dr. Damon.
Oh, good morning, Tim. Thank you. It's a glorious day. A little bit overcast, but the skies are clearing up here in southern Louisiana.
Yeah, beautiful. We have the same thing happening here. It's been, I'm not sure if we're going to have sunny weather for the 4th because it's going back and forth about 20 times a day. I sing the praises of our neck of the woods.
Right.
But it does go back and forth between sunny and cloudy a lot when it's cloudy.
Right.
It's one setback.
So it's been a hot one. Yeah.
Yes, it has. You and I, that is, did, I think, an excellent show on IVF about 7 weeks hence. And
wow,
that was actually 8 weeks hence now.
Wow.
And that was really a gem. And people were really getting a lot of info from that. What I want to do is translate the Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health issue, which is not quite the silent killer that, from a moral standpoint, that IVF was. So people might be thinking, well, I know not to get an abortion, but you as a OBGYN have a unique perspective on all this. And I just wanted to pick your brain today. And
sure,
I wanted to open up, and I also wanted to invite questions, I should say, at the end of the show today here on Rules for Retrogrades. Parish orphans, retrogrades, direct your best questions to this very Catholic, very pro-life OBGYN. I'm not talking about myself. Don't moonlight as an OBGYN.
Well, I think you give me more credit than I deserve, but I appreciate it.
Yeah. I try to give more credit than guests deserve. No.
You're doing good.
So how about this? What is especially stupid? And it's free reign. Because there's a lot of areas to talk about here about the Roe versus Wade majority opinion, which recurs repeatedly to this idea of viability. Initially off the bat, this strikes me like a cancer doctor, an oncologist, saying, well, because cancer research is really young in defeating this particular type of cancer, it's open season on anyone who suffers with this type of cancer. They can be killed at any time. I mean, isn't the goal for medical science to get the age of viability? This is to, conception age?
Right, absolutely. Well, Tim, before I answer that and we get into it, I just would like to start with invoking the intercession of the Holy Spirit, because these are very profound spiritual questions or challenges at the root of all this. So I'm just going to read the version I have here. In the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful and kindle in them the fire of your love. Send forth your Holy Spirit, and they shall be created, and you shall renew the face of the earth. O God, who by the light of the Holy Spirit did instruct the hearts of the faithful, grant that by the same Holy Spirit we may be truly wise and ever enjoy or rejoice in his consolations. Through the same Christ our Lord. Amen. Okay. Amen. So, the viability, it is incredibly arbitrary that was chosen, and it was not entirely honest that viability was ever intended to be a real absolute limit for the requirement that states allow abortion. And it's certainly arbitrary because what is considered viability in 1973 was different than what would have been considered viability in 1873. And it's certainly not the same as what we'd consider viability in 2023. And all they had really meant by viability in that context was a child that could survive outside the womb. And we come down to percentages, and you'll look at currently, and it hasn't really changed in the past 20 years since I've been in this profession. The agreed standard is in the United States, at least 23 weeks and 5 days, or just under 24 weeks of gestation dated from the last menstrual period, or actually 2 weeks prior to conception, which is just some technical specifics I, like to include. But it's not even universal in the world. In some places like Japan, actually, they will actually do more aggressive interventions to save the children prior to 23 weeks, and they have good success. But 23 and 5 was chosen because that was the point at which about a little more than 50% of children survived what they would call intact without any major, impairment or major problems later in life. And then every week after that, it improves in terms of the long-term, health of the child, and long-term viability. So viability it's a very kind of squishy term. And you even see it. I was on a conference call in the state with some discussion of IVF. There was a law they were trying to force insurance companies to pay for IVF in the state just a week after our last show. And some of these other IVF doctors were talking about non-viable embryos, meaning only embryos that were actually alive at that time, but not likely to live very long. So you can see how that justification of non-viability can be used to do something that would actually prematurely, end the life of the child. Yeah. So by that definition, we're all non-viable, at some point. So, but it's, I think the word itself is incredibly problematic, but interesting that it was Justice Roberts, that was his primary and his sole, real concern with Roe v. Wade and his opinion. But I think that, that is, like, just to sum it up, it's arbitrary what viability is. And I think there's really no legitimate ethical or moral reason to use that as a threshold to allow, the extermination, the killing of a child in the womb.
Dobbs versus Jackson comes from a relatively short list of Supreme Court dispositions, wherein the disposition differs, even contradicts the black letter law. Famous one that most people know about is Marbury versus Madison. The disposition in that case contradicts the black letter law. Also, Everson versus Board of Ed. You guys hear me talk, just a lot about Everson versus Board of Ed in 1947. Another SCOTUS case where the black letter law is in contradiction to the disposition on the specific case before them. What I mean is, the court will say, yes, petitioner granted or petitioner denied, but then the black letter ruling for basically the law, the judge-made law being made going forward, judicial review after Marbury versus Madison, the reversal of the meaning of the First Amendment in the case of Everson. In this case, the reversal of Roe. Well, in Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health, it's only Justice Roberts, not the entire court, that had a contraposed disposition and black letter law. So he said, yes, I'm part of a 6-3 majority on the disposition of the case, but no, I'm basically part of a 4-5 minority on whether or not Roe was overturned. And that they probably have, who can speculate something on Justice Roberts, because he's really been a disappointment.
And absolutely, but we'll take it. I mean, it makes the final, ruling 6-3, which definitely makes it more powerful than a more narrow 5-4. But but
it's only 5-4 on not on overturning. You can have different counts of law, so we'll take it.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, exactly. we'll take him on our side to the extent he'll come on our side. So that's good, and it definitely helps, on that. But yeah, I'm also disappointed that he wasn't more fully able to see the errors of and the injustice of the Roe v. Wade decision. But I think we're all just still processing this. I mean, Tim, you and I and a lot of other friends of ours, probably never thought we would see Roe v. Wade overturned in our lifetime. We always desired it, but we never thought we would see it. And I've been very involved in even legislation in our state here, the state capitol, and I've was very involved in a case that was decided just 2 years earlier, not that really against us primarily. And all we were trying to do in this June medical services case, we had passed in Louisiana a law requiring abortionists to have the same standards of care in terms of admitting privileges. And that was such a threat because the abortionists in the state weren't willing to do that, that it went to the Supreme Court. And again, all we were trying to do is literally make abortion safer for women, as pathetic as that is. But I remember in similar laws, when they were being argued before the legislature and proposed by the representatives, they would have to say, we believe this meets constitutional muster with Roe v. Wade. And they were talking about Roe v. Wade as if it was constitutional. And so many laws throughout the nation and the various states were not intended to defy Roe v. Wade the way this Mississippi law was. And so, I got to give it to the state of Mississippi for really intentionally challenging and defying, the injustice that Roe v. Wade has been, for the past 49 years.
That's like nullification.
Right.
Nullification is wherein a state legislature ignores an unjust, tyrannical law that comes down from Congress, and they say, we're doing the opposite. That's nullification. This is like federal, national, judicial nullification, where a state legislature defied the federal judiciary, and it was beautiful, and we were proud to be from Mississippi. We say,
yeah,
that's why we moved here, man. It happened right after we moved here, and
right.
Exciting. Let me ask you this about
sure.
Viability.
Okay.
Isn't it a stupid Peter Singer-like argument to talk about the viability of a fetus at any level? I mean, we've got this newborn baby here that's usually in the room when I'm doing shows now, little 6-week-old Penelope, and she isn't viable without her parents, but
good point.
Really her mother. I mean,
right.
And Peter Singer makes this argument more honestly. He's a more honest infanticidist. He says, look, you should be able to kill something with human DNA until it has achieved personhood. And personhood means you begin having personal characteristics at about 2.5, 3.
Wow. I think it also says that, other primates like gorillas and orangutans that are adults, have greater, value and dignity than a newborn infant. The same. This is going to be.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you mentioned Peter Singer because I was listening to some talks you've given on your Don't Go to College book that's coming out. And when I was in college, I double majored in biology and Spanish, but I had some free time and I did take one class in philosophy. I was hoping to study Aristotle or something like that. And this philosophy 101 class I took in college was Peter Singer. It was this kind of nonsense. And I was sorry. So that I definitely I agree that you're really going to be disappointed if you expect to learn philosophy in college, but yeah, the viability, that's so true, that the infant is entirely dependent on the care of the parents, and even through childhood. I mean, a 7-year-old can't live on his own or her own, at that point. So the idea that a child is dependent on the mother primarily in utero in no way lessens its dignity, its humanity, it's his or her humanity in the situation. So, one of the few Supreme Court cases, that probably one of the only that I've read in its entirety, is Roe v. Wade. And several years ago, I read through this, and I've been involved in this work, trying to teach the truth and work for the overturning of it, or just a greater respect for human dignity. And what really struck me is that they claim in Roe v. Wade, among many other falsehoods, that they don't know when life begins. And think about that for a minute. The Supreme Court, in ruling that states, cannot make any laws against abortion, really through all 9 months. We can get into that. That they invent this trimester system for this purpose. But one of their false premises is that they don't know when life begins. And so I did some research when I've spoken about this, and it became clear nearly 100 years prior when life begins. And again, this is just something that people don't realize. There's it has to do with the discovery of the microscope, and this scientist called Oster Hertwig in 1876, he published findings about the fertilization that includes the penetration of the sperm into the egg cell. And so, nearly 100 years prior to Roe v. Wade, we had a scientific understanding of what conception is and what fertilization is. And so it was entirely dishonest to claim that we didn't know. And then to take it a step further, if we don't know when life begins, you always err on the side of caution. If you don't know that gun is loaded, you shouldn't, point at someone and pull the trigger.
Yeah, exactly.
Just ask Al Baldwin, right? So if you don't know that there's not a kid behind that, there's leaves rustling in the forest, you're not going to take a shot at it because it might be a deer, it might be a kid that's out there. So, that is, just a completely disingenuous and unethical and immoral proposition to claim that we have to force legalized abortion because we don't know. Even if that were true that we didn't know, which obviously it wasn't.
Yeah, it's an excellent point. The moderates make this lie that they don't know. Basically, how to define life would be genetically human, right? 46 chromosomes.
Full complement of chromosomes, right?
Right, and is biologically living, meaning there are 5 factors.
Cells are dividing. Yeah, there's
cellular mitosis, right?
Right.
So that's a lie in the first place. This line is most often spat out by moderates, but you really hit the nail on the head here when it comes to, let's grant you that we don't know when life begins. Arguendo, out of pocket.
Right.
Even if so, okay, man. Well, I know gun safety, like you say. I don't point a gun at anything that might, in any possible universe, have a living human being behind it that I don't intend to shoot, defensively or something
that's innocent, right? not a threat to your family, right?
We do not take 50-50 risks with innocent human life, and that's precisely what they're doing. What about Father James Martin? He says, like the sophist that he is, it's good that Dobbs happened, I guess. But I will say, I'll grant the other side that this 9-month-old fetus ready to be born is very different from this newly fertilized little baby, 10-minute-old fertilized egg. What do you say to that? No one ever said they look alike.
Right. And you and I, in our 40s are very different than we were in our single digit years in childhood. I mean, I'm a very different person, as, an adult man and father and physician than I was as a 4-year-old. And there's a tremendous difference in who I am in terms of my abilities and my physical stature and in many other ways in my knowledge and skills, so much more than when I was a newborn or a 2-year-old. So yeah, that's incredibly misleading to make that assertion. I want to give just another analogy, just kind of a mental picture. Some people know that I had spent time in the military and I was in Iraq during 2006 or 2007. And at one point, I was a general medical officer or a field surgeon. I was attached to an artillery unit, and we were south of Baghdad. And you wouldn't think there's a lot of roles for artillery in this situation, but one of the things they did find to do with this artillery unit in Iraq was they were called area denial missions. So many times the enemy would go into these open fields to launch mortars at the base where we were at. So we would look for potential areas that might be a good place to stage mortar attacks against us. And we would launch artillery into those areas just to kind of a show of force. However, they would never do it. And this is a principle for those who know artillery. They would never fire artillery unless they had an observer, overwatch, that could make sure there wasn't a goat herder passing through there. There wasn't a child anywhere in the vicinity. They had to, before they could launch this artillery shell into an open field, and you could have had a calculation that there's a 99% chance no one's there, but they wouldn't even do it then unless they had eyes on the target and knew that there wasn't life there. So that's how, even in a military operation, when we have equipment designed to destroy and kill. And in that situation, there had to be 100% certainty that there was no life in that field before an artillery shell was launched there.
That moves us along nicely to the next thing I wanted to ask you about, Dr. Damon, which is The Hippocratic Oath. I mean, this is this whole idea of check twice, fire once, don't be trigger happy, which governs basically every other realm of possible human danger, is stood on its head, like you've been talking about for the last 5 minutes. How does this not cover the realm of the Hippocratic Oath? That is to say, if you take a solemn vow, the way Americans take this thing very seriously, and other Western nations, first world nations, are very serious with their physicians about the Hippocratic Oath.
Well, it might be just yeah. So I'll give you the Latin: primum non nocere. And that's the principle that it was originally based on, and I believe in that very much in my practice, and I try to live according to that. And I can give some details and things that people may not expect, but your audience may be disappointed. You may be too, Tim, to learn that we haven't actually taken the Hippocratic Oath for a couple of decades. When I was in medical school 20 years ago, my second year, we all sat around in small groups, and we basically tried to come up with ideas of it. We made up our own oath, basically. This idea of taking an oath of our ancestors and our forefathers and our mentors that passed down to us had been obliterated. And so we all came up with some, and basically it was a bunch of platitudes and politically correct statements about cherishing diversity and that kind of thing. But in my group, I tried to, make an appeal for, a principle of just, respecting all human life from the moment of conception until natural death, and basically what was in the original Hippocratic Oath against abortion. And I remember some of my other colleagues, some of the other students, my other classmates, the word I was looking for, the other classmates in my group, kind of hesitated, and they said, well, what will the faculty say? What will our professors say? They were hesitant to submit that as a part of an oath that we wanted to contribute, not because they disagreed with it, because they were afraid that they might be punished by their faculty, that they would be looked down upon. That was very instructive to me. So that's kind of where we are. I mean, we haven't, there's been, most physicians today, I would argue, or at least half of them, probably have not actually taken an oath that specifies, that we will not take life by abortion, or even later, with euthanasia. But so that is, very unfortunate. But in my practice, it's not just about abortion. Even with obstetrics, taking care of women, C-sections are a very important tool, but I only do them when they're really necessary. And so my C-section rate tends to be a lot lower than my peers, because I don't think that that's necessarily to the patient's benefit to do it, routinely and unnecessarily. And then I do a lot of surgery, for example, for pelvic pain causing infertility via endometriosis. And I do it in a way that's as minimally invasive as possible, only 3 incisions if I can, and as quickly to get them in and out of the OR so that they're not under anesthesia for too long. So, any good physician today is going to operate by this principle of trying to avoid harm, not operating if not necessary, and when operating, trying to minimize the harm done.
It's like the first principle of practical reason Aquinas articulates, applied to medical ethics, do the good, avoid the evil.
Right.
Would you characterize that this is a big problem in the OBGYN world? Lazy kind of flunky doctors recurring to the C-section too quickly because they want to go home after dinner?
Yeah, and it's one of the few areas where the academia of OBGYN actually likes me, because I'm one of the few that's actually living up to their ideal of having a lower C-section rate. But and the practical world, there's a lot of C-sections done between 5 and 6 o'clock when office hours are finished. Ask any nurse that works in labor.
Yeah, it's horrible. It's horrible. I mean,
it's true. And
I have meatloaf tonight. Come on, we're gonna cut you
exactly. Or there's a show I want to watch, or I'm tired. And my wife, God bless her, she has suffered many a night with me not being there for dinner because I'm waiting for someone, because with their first delivery, to have a vaginal delivery, and I know that if I just wait a few more hours, sometimes she will eventually do it. And so it is a certain burden, on the OB/GYN physician to do that. So I think that, yeah, certainly there is a lot of, and I think even the most pro-abortion secular, OB/GYNs would acknowledge that C-section rates are higher than they should be. Interestingly, even they would agree with that point. But I want to kind of, while we're talking about safety in women, I want to kind of move on to something else. There's and thinking about what your listeners need to hear. There's a lot of talk on the talk shows and from different pro-abortion celebrities, the misinformation, this idea that, abortion is healthcare. And I saw a brief clip of Hillary Clinton, saying that women will die. And I think it's worthwhile to take a few minutes to point out why all of that is wrong. And even before that, maybe it's important to get some terminology down, because there's a lot of confusion and misdirection. So I don't know where you want to start. Maybe some terminology. Is that a good place to start philosophically?
Sure. First off, go ahead. But I'll just say this:
Yeah.
The argument that women, attempted murderers who attempt to murder their young after this is illegalized in their state may die is as stupid and as important to me, which is to say not at all, as murderers, burglars might die if they break into houses and try to kill you, and they're gonna get shot. It's like, well, this is the risk assumption of the risk. This is cost of doing business, baby. Yeah, you try to murder someone and you die from your attempted violent murder. I'm not going to cry myself to death at night. I don't know.
Yeah, we don't need to make crime safe. Yeah, and I think there's another level, though. I think we can, that's an easy point. But I think there's another level that they're trying to argue that abortion is healthcare. And certainly Dr. Bernard Nathanson, who furthered that lie that Planned Parenthood still uses in their propaganda, he's, before he died and after his conversion, he recanted of those lies that he perpetuated, that, millions of women are dying from these back alley illegal abortions. And that seemed to gain a lot of the public perception and sway a lot of public that women were doing this anyway. We need to make it safe. That was part of the propaganda. But there's another argument that I think is equally misleading, that it has to do with a lack of understanding of the terminology. And we're talking about the difference between indirect and direct abortion, and actual legitimate medical procedures that might be necessary to save the mother's life, or the child's life can't be saved. And I think misunderstanding and misrepresentation of these kind of issues is partly what allowed abortion to be legalized in Ireland recently, to my horror. But so let's start with
this is most basic. And
yes,
these indirect abortions, which the church doesn't teach against, which have never been illegal, which will never be illegal,
absolutely,
are the most embarrassing baseline for undertaking an argument. And yet screaming, crazy women are screaming about them every day in the streets. So what's this distinction? The direct.
So let's start with the word abortion. The word abortion in the medical jargon is actually not very specific. Now, when we hear about it, in the context of Roe v. Wade and Dobbs and all this, what we're really referring to is what would either be described as induced abortion, elective abortion, procured abortion. There's always a modifier that indicates it's not medically required, that it is something that is done essentially for convenience or based on the desire, the whim of the mother or the father, both in that situation. So, but yeah, abortion by itself. So the most common types of abortion that I talk about in my practice would be spontaneous abortion. That's a miscarriage. And there's debate about how often this happens. As far as clinically recognized pregnancies, it's probably somewhere around the 10% range. People argue it might be as high as 50%, but whatever it is, it's not entirely relevant to the matter of what we're discussing. But it does happen. We'll say 10%. That's what we are fairly certain, maybe 15%, depending on age and lots of other factors. So spontaneous abortion is also colloquially known as a miscarriage. And so when I do the first trimester ultrasound, the baby's measuring about a centimeter, or and a half or so, not much bigger than a gummy bear. Normally, I should be able to see the baby's heartbeat in that situation. We're talking about just not more than a month after, really a month after conception, I should be able to see the heartbeat. A woman's just found out she's pregnant. If I can't see the heartbeat, that's usually the clearest indication that the baby sadly has died, even though the baby's still in the woman's uterus. She might not even know that. And it's a devastating thing. There's, it's a tragedy. So in this situation, this woman comes to me for her first appointment 8 weeks after her last menstrual period, so 6 weeks after conception. And I take a look on the ultrasound and I see a baby, but I don't see a heartbeat when I should. The baby's far enough developed that I should. So there's a new term now. Now we call that, it sounds odd, it's called missed abortion. and what that really, so it's missed, meaning that the baby has died, has stopped developing. There's no life. We're not talking about, the baby isn't non-viable. The baby is simply dead or there's been a fetal demise. And so that we often have to intervene, either with a process of, we can wait for her to pass the remains of the child on her own, or we can intervene with a procedure called a dilation and curettage. And this procedure, interestingly, DNC is the abbreviation, is technically the same thing that is done typically by an abortionist outside of the hospital. It's almost never done outside of a hospital or a medical or a surgical center anyway, for the case of a miscarriage. So even though the procedure that I do all the time at DNC is technically, it would look the same, the difference is I'm removing the remains, basically the corpse, tiny as he or she is, rather than causing the death and destruction of a living child. There's another way that this can be treated sometimes by giving medications to cause the uterus to contract. And that is kind of the second stage. It's almost what happens with these so-called medication abortions or medical abortions. The only difference is with the medical abortions that they're trying to push by mail now, there's two stages. There's one where an anti-progesterone toxin is given called Nifeprex, or used to be known as RU46. But this is designed to kill the child. And then the follow-up would be misoprostol, also known as Cytotec, which is a medication caused to cause uterus to have contractions to then expel the remains. So that's a lot there, but I want to go through a couple more terms of abortion. So we have spontaneous abortion, missed abortion, commonly related, and then we have a septic abortion. And this is a situation much more common as a sequelae to an attempted induced abortion or elective abortion, where the woman gets septic, she's infected. It's extremely rare. I've never seen it in a woman who had a natural miscarriage. The only woman I've ever taken care of who had septic abortions were those who went to and had illegal, in the secular sense of the word, illegal attempted induced abortion at an abortion center outside of a hospital. And then she came to an ER where I was at, septic and very ill. So I think if we understand that for some groundwork with abortion, then we can go into talking about direct and indirect abortion. And I'll let you fill in the language of principle of double effect. But the most clear example, the most classic one that we use would be where an indirect abortion may be necessary to save a woman's life is the setting of a tubal ectopic pregnancy. And this is a very tragic and dangerous situation where the human embryo, the baby, as tiny as he or she is, has implanted in the fallopian tube. And even though there's been some pro-life doctors that have tried, I'm not aware of any situations where they've been successfully able to transfer the child from the tube to the uterus, which would be the ideal. So all that we can do to prevent the woman from hemorrhaging from the tube rupturing is to remove, the safest thing anyway would be to remove that fallopian tube with the baby inside. And that does cause unavoidably the secondary effect of the child dying. So that was probably one of the most classic examples or most common examples of an indirect abortion. And that the church has never taught against.
Right, because the principle of double effect covers. It's interesting in action theory, Thomas argue mainly with the new natural law guys, Germain Grisset and John Finnis and Boyle and those guys were famous action theorists as sort of the new bad guys, if you will, who argue that a craniotomy is kind of like one of these cases where you can have an indirect abortion, and the principle of double effect will cover you. It actually doesn't for such a thing as a craniotomy, where traditionally the baby's too big to come out. It comes from a time when they couldn't do C-sections and they would crush the baby's skull. There is no principle of double effect that covers that, because there is no firstmost end or teleology that will that you're focusing on. What the common person on the street doesn't understand is that principle of double effect operates presuming that there can be a fully foreseeable 100% chance, and that is not intended. So something can be intended, not intended while foreseen. That's what makes the principle of double effect go. Like,
I spoke to that recently.
In your house, you shoot, and what am I trying to do? Defend myself or my family if they're advancing on me with a knife or a gun. But that doesn't mean we're not claiming, we Thomistic advocates of the principle of double effect, the church all but buys this line of reasoning, that you don't know what's going to happen. The more callow gainsayers of the principle of double effect will say, oh yeah, right, like you actually are trying to defend yourself and you don't know you're going to kill someone. No, you know you're going to kill someone. That's just the second unintended yet foreseen effect. That does get you off the hook for uterine issues where the baby is fully, if you can, what are you hoping? This is all you have to ask as a proponent of the principle of double effect. What are you hoping? If you tried to move this baby from the fallopian tube to the uterus, are you hoping that it survives? You will always know, because intent specifies end and form for Thomas, whether or not the principle of double effect applies.
And clearly in these situations, the woman, I mean, it's a situation where the woman does not desire the death of her child. Right. And it is a great tragedy. And I think it's important. I was thinking about this, I think last night or this morning, that these situations are rare, but it's important to specify them so that we can address, the objections. So it is extremely rare, the situation where where we can't do everything, where we can't possibly save the life of both. And so, people might see that as choosing the life of the mother of the child, but the reality is the child can't be saved in these situations. Now, there is another extreme where the mother can't be saved and the child can. And people don't think about that, and where we can only save the child. And that would be a woman who goes into cardiac arrest. I mean, she's 38 weeks, happens to be close enough to the hospital. She's brought in an ambulance and she has died. Her heart has stopped beating. What do we do then? And this is, or more typically, maybe a traumatic automobile accident where she's bled out and now she's pregnant. We do an emergency C-section. We get that baby out as fast as we can. It's called a post-mortem C-section. So the mother has already died. We can't save the mother, but we can save the child. So that's that's how rare these things are, where sometimes we can only save the baby. Sometimes we can only save the mother. Fortunately, 99% of the time, we can save them both. And that any good doctor would always seek to do that.
How long in those situations, Dr. Damon, do you have to get the baby out?
So good question. And it goes back to the C-section thing. We think there's probably about 30 minutes, actually, believe it or not, 20 to 30 minutes where the baby can survive, maybe closer to 20, because they've done experiments on primates where they actually ligated the umbilical cord. How long can the fetal, monkey survive after that? And so that has kind of dictated what the standard of care is in medicine. When we decide the baby's in distress, how long can we wait before we get the baby out? And so 20 minutes from the decision, from the when we should start the surgery. So yeah, it's longer than you would think. It's not seconds, it's actually minutes, certainly not an hour. But so if it just happened, the woman just died, you actually do have a few minutes to get her to the OR and do a post-mortem C-section.
The ligation of the umbilical cord simulates metabolic.
Exactly. Well, it would simulate the placenta, somehow the placenta becoming detached or having no further oxygenation from the mother. So the baby is dependent on the mother for oxygen as well as other nutrients, but the most immediate nutrient for survival is oxygen. So there's about 30 minutes, and which is much longer than an adult can hold his breath. There's amazing things about the fetal hemoglobin that can survive survive hypoxia longer than an adult can. So yeah, 30 minutes is kind of the point where you start seeing profound, irreversible harm when the baby is hypoxic.
I want to make one distinction. When you do this, there's always the risk of, if I'm talking to you, or I'm talking to a PhD in philosophy or whatever, just Steph and I have these kind of conversations. I'll say things like, Peter Singer, I said this earlier, Peter Singer, he's better. He's more honest. He just wants total infanticide. It's always a danger when you're talking to tens of thousands of people, because you'll see it on Twitter later that day. Someone will be like, today on Rules for Retrogrades, Gordon said Peter Singer is better than a normal advocate for abortion, because Peter Singer thinks you should be able to kill a born baby of 6 months. I'm like, not better. He's worse. He's a monster. He's also a complete idiot who argues for animal rights. But I was saying he's more honest insofar as he pushes the
logical consistency,
rational considerations as far as they'll go the other way. So I want to get that out there.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah,
I hate Peter Singer. I don't like him, but he's more prone to, his arguments anyway, being set on the shelf, so we can really see out there in the open what the secular humanist perspective on the young are. And they're much more the equivalent of the secular humanist perspective on the old. Basically just kill someone once they get too old to be
inconvenient,
worthwhile. Yeah, that's the view. And it's not restricted to preborn baby. I mean, what a stupid distinction. As an OB-GYN, could we just maybe you take us out, and then we'll take some questions for you from the audience if they have them. Why isn't this the dumbest distinction ever, whether or not a human is, forget viability, but whether or not it's living inside its mother is the distinction that even many moderate conservatives have bought for decades. I mean, is it a human baby or not?
Right.
With half a brain. Why has this been so compelling to the simple-minded, that if a baby is living inside the uterus of its mother, it's not a baby?
I don't think it really is, if you're honest. And this was something, a eureka moment, or a real insight for me a few years ago, maybe 10 years ago, that, because for years, and I'm sure you were in the same situation, Jim, we're trying to argue the science. We're trying to say, you have the full complement of DNA. This is what conception is. But when it really comes down to it, we, as Americans, the people who desire abortion to remain legal and option, it's not because they really have any misunderstanding about when human life begins, whether or not it's because they want the convenience. As Mother Teresa famously said, that is a great that a child must die so that you may live as you wish. It's really a great poverty that a child must die so that we may live as we wish. That it's really about profound selfishness and narcissism, that we really, when it comes down to it, we believe that we should be able to kill our child for our own advancement, for our perceived good, for our own pleasure, our own convenience. And that's what it really comes down to. And a couple of points I'll make, because now we're running short a little bit on time, but there's going back to the health thing, another thing that has been promoted internationally is this idea of maternal mortality. And when there was a big push 10 years ago to force Ireland to legalize abortion as a part of their membership in the European Union, they were claiming that this was a maternal health issue. And I wrote about this at one point, and I'll just read a little bit from here. Again, this is 12 years ago. Sadly, they had thought that they were initially taking a stand, but at that time, Ireland had arguably the lowest maternal mortality rate in the world. So as of 2010, when I've written this, Ireland was ranked number 2 in the world for lowest mortality rate. Greece's maternal mortality rate was slightly lower, but they had a very low birth rate. So they're in a very small country. It was only like a 1,000th of a percent difference. However, Ireland had a much higher birth rate, more comparable to that of the United States. The United States was ranked, I think it was 24 on terms of maternal mortality rate. We have one of the highest abortion rates in the world. So there was, just looking at epidemiology, there's clearly no statistical correlation between legalized abortion and maternal safety. In fact, quite the opposite. So if you actually looked at the data, that a country where abortion was illegal actually did not in any way have any adverse harm, statistically to women. And that's just something that I think we just need to get out there, because again, that sways people, this idea that there's some health need, that somehow women are going to be protected by keeping abortion legal. And then, I think that I want to share another insight, and having been involved in this work for at least 3 decades now, is that it's easy for us to become focused solely on the life of the child who's threatened. And that's good. That's our natural instinct, especially as fathers and men, to protect and defend the innocent. However, as Catholics, we see that there are eternal souls at stake. And I'm going to, give credit to a good friend and mentor of mine, Dr. Jose Fernandez, who's a family practice doctor in Kissimmee, Florida. And I was at a Catholic Medical Association conference down there once, and he made the point that with every abortion, it's not just the child that dies, it's the soul of the mother that dies, the soul of the father, oftentimes the soul of the doctor who's committing the abortion, the so-called escorts. And you have these eternal
child. That's the great
exactly that's deprived of the sure way we know to salvation of baptism. Yes, and that's a whole nother ball of wax, but clearly condemned. I mean, in terms of directly intending a great evil, and so that's that one child's murder, the spiritual wreckage that creates, for so many other people as a ripple effect, is what, we need to be really attuned to. And that first rule of our faith, salvation of souls.
Yeah. Imagine a baby being delivered, baptized immediately, and then it dies 15 minutes after it's born. Like, I have a friend, many people here know him, Patrick Coffin, who's spoken lots of this tragedy, but babies baptized. Abortion, not only is a mother, the person most charged with the care and love of a young baby early in life anyway, become murderous, but also this is an unbaptized baby. That's a really hard reality. So what a horrible thing. Is there any country with higher abortion rates than the US? I thought we were head and shoulders above. I thought we just led the world in this dubious distinction.
That I know Russia was first to the punch in legalizing abortion widespread, and they may still have higher rates. But yeah, we may still be the highest in terms of sheer numbers of abortions. That's a statistic I don't have right now, but yeah, I'll just share, when you were speaking about that, Tim, I'll never forget, and I've had the honor of being able to baptize many children that were an imminent death, before a priest or deacon could get there to do it,
Really?
In the setting of this baby's born premature, 18 weeks, and it's going to die within minutes. And so there's been dozens of kids I've baptized, but one was a baby that was fully formed, which isn't that common. Many times in ectopic pregnancies, the baby's already died, but this is one where I was in the OR, had removed the fallopian tube, and and the family had asked me beforehand, and I was literally holding this baby. Again, I like to use the term gummy bear when you're looking, but this tiny, if you could imagine, and the heart was beating. I'm certain of it, and the nurse brought me some water, and I was able to baptize a child at that size in the operating room, and that's something that certainly, if at all possible, we should yeah, that's an argument for infant baptism, but sometimes even before birth. Wow. So yeah, safety, that's something that, I think that we need to really, the truth is on our side, is something that I want to leave your audience with in terms of safety. Abortion is not legal because it's, healthcare. And in fact, the evidence shows that abortion is health harm, and we can go into, psychological harm, increased risk of suicide, drug abuse, depression, even a post-abortion syndrome for many women. So I think pointing that out helps people to reconsider, this, what they've been hearing, this idea that abortion is somehow healthcare and somehow good for women. It's really only, a perceived good for convenience, and this, false, desire of self-serving, decisions.
non-negligibly raised cancer rates for breast and uterine cancer.
Certainly.
Right?
Oh, yes.
Why is that, do you think?
That's a good question. So there are a few physicians that have studied this. And so what happened, this actually goes into the physiology of breast cancer and breast development. It's particularly a problem with a woman's first pregnancy, and it's distinct from a natural miscarriage. So, and we have to be honest that the majority of of abortions probably are a woman's first pregnancy, and those are the one most at risk for the increased risk of breast cancer, and and it appears to be the most biologically plausible explanation of this is that a woman goes through the final maturing of her breast not after puberty, but during her first pregnancy. That's when you have these milk producing cells within breast tissue that mature for the first time in a way that they can make milk and preparing for nursing and breastfeeding. And this process there's a lot rapidly dividing cells. That's why women oftentimes, the first symptom of pregnancy is breast tenderness. And so with a natural miscarriage, there's sort of a gradual drop of the hormones. And so this process of breast maturing, kind of stops pretty early. But in the situation of an induced abortion, a procured surgically or chemically caused abortion, you have an abrupt artificial drop in hormones. So you have these cells that have been dividing in the breast, rapidly multiplying, and then you have it quickly cut off. So you have a lot of these immature cells that have never fully developed. And so those cells that have been rapidly developing and dividing are more vulnerable to go on to cause breast cancer. And so that seems to be some of the physiology behind why they have observed significantly higher rates of breast cancer in women who've had abortions, particularly the first child. And there's other reasons why we see high rates of breast cancer with birth control pills. Also, again, for women who haven't had children yet, that's the highest risk group. I'm more familiar with that statistic. It's about a 40% increase risk of premenopausal breast cancer for a woman who's been on birth control pills, particularly after being on them for about 5 years, which is, all these high school girls put on the pill but haven't had children yet because the woman's, there's correlations between breast cancer and the age at first pregnancy. So the younger a woman is when she has her first full-term delivery, the lower her lifetime risk of breast cancer. So there's something protective about having children against breast cancer. I mean, we could go on. It's amazing stuff.
That's really the younger a woman has kids, the more protected.
And the more children she's had. Breast cancer, the only thing that a woman can do, interestingly, short of like mastectomy and remove the ovaries, to simultaneously reduce her risk of breast cancer, ovarian cancer, and uterine cancer is to have lots of children and starting at a young age. So the women with the most children, and starting at earliest age are actually the women that have the lowest risks of breast cancer. It used to be thought of as like the nun's disease. Breast cancer is almost unheard of, except in among religious sisters, a celibate that didn't have children. And we really didn't see the explosion of breast cancer take off until you started seeing delayed childbearing. But at the same time, it seemed to be timed with the introduction of artificial hormonal birth control pills, which was doing a lot of harm. And again, there's another good friend, Dr. Chris Callenborn's done a lot of work with the connection between birth control pills, hormonal contraceptives, and breast cancer. Even a secular organization, the World Health Organization, has seen that. We're getting off topic of abortion, but these things are related. And I think, that's something we could talk about further, maybe at a future show, because,
that's good. I like my wife is my favorite person in the world, and I'm a hypochondriac, and
mine is too.
I'm always worried about that. So like seven kids, that's a good shield against.
Yeah, she's definitely lowered herself in the lowest risk category for sure.
Great. Yes. Well, Dr. Damon, it's been great. Yeah. Are you prepared? You already said you already have some questions.
Sure. Absolutely.
You gather those up. I want to just remind folks, this is the 4th of July weekend, Independence Day. Lots of my audience, lots of trads have had a lot of conflicting brainwash flushed in about the really honestly complicated origins, the etiology of the American intellectual tradition. And I mean 1776, the Declaration, 1788, the Constitution, 1791, the Bill of Rights. I set this all straight in Catholic Republic. And on the 4th of July, I think it'll come up first thing in the morning, I have an article called something like 4 Years of Catholic Republic. And we're celebrating the book's been out for 4 years. And I dispel some of the major, I say gainsayers with a set of scare quotes around it because they're weak arguments. But some of the gainsayers of the ideas of Catholic Republic are mainly setting up straw men. And it's going to be a really good article. And you're going to see lots of, you know, the equivalent of crying libs are kind of, you know, crying staggered letter. Oh, but America's a Masonic country early on. Yeah, it is now. It wasn't antebellum America wasn't before the Civil War. It was quite based, even though it was set up by mainly Protestants. So that article, look out for that article. Yeah.
I want to go and give, endorsement. I read that book about 3 years ago, not long after you published it. I think I have the original copy that Milo published. That gives you an idea how long I read it. And but it definitely gave me a lot of hope for the founding principles of natural law for our country. But until this Dobbs decision last week, it was very guarded. I have more hope than ever before of restoring our country to these principles of Catholic natural law, more than ever that I thought it would have, for this country. And so this is going to be a particularly wonderful 4th of July. And so I'm looking forward to that article.
Dobbs is proof of concept. As they like. Now, look, even before Dobbs, when you said that there's a beginning, and I didn't ever, you said, you probably agree with me, Tim. I do agree with you. I did not think we would see the overturn of Roe in our lives. But even when I wrote this book in 15, 16, 17, 18 was the second edition, I always had hope for a kind of survival of America, which is the balkanized secessionist version of America. Thomas Jefferson wrote when he was vice president that the future of American happiness depends not on all of the states in the Union currently until forevermore remaining in the Union. There's some version of American happiness will persist as long as some of the American states carry forward the banner. So that's what I've always believed in. It's like, look, what I believed before Dobbs, what I continue to believe now is you need some American balkanization. There's no such thing as a continent-sized republic. And I'm hoping that Dobbs will hasten the dichotomy further between blue and red. And then we can really get down to business even more. We can get specific, we can get Christian, we can get even specifically Catholic states. Once we sever off those pesky blue states. That's why I really want everyone who's good to get to some sort of red state. It's better to be in one of the contiguous red states. Most of the red states are contiguous. So read my article on 1 Peter 5 on July the 4th. It's going to produce lots of the equivalent of a crying lib is a sort of crying, somewhat brainwashed, not willing to be corrected trad who's like, but America's Masonic. It's going to be good. Do we have some questions?
Good questions?
We have lots of questions. So just tell me, Dr. Kudahy, if you are running out of time here. But first off, I wanted to say I love when you come on the show. It's so interesting, and everybody in chat has just loves whenever you bring your thoughts and
thank you.
The medical world here. More personally, I want to thank you. You've helped me quite a bit since I've had so many C-sections with some really great advice. But one of the questions I know a lot of people have, we've received a ton of emails from women because they all know, I'm very public about. I've had 6 C-sections, and we've talked about that quite a bit. Tons of emails about that issue. I'm wondering if you can give any insight to that. A lot of women, get a lot of bad advice about multiple C-sections. I'm wondering if you could maybe say
Sure. Oh, thank you. So there is no established number of C-sections beyond which we can say it is, contraindicated to get pregnant again. And what that means is there's no medical evidence to say that there's a limit to the number of C-sections that a woman can have. Personally, I've done, I can think of this past year, an 11th C-section at least once. I've done several other high orders, 7, 8, 9. And by the grace of God and the good medical team I was able to work with, she did fine. She went home 3 days later, like 99% of our patients with C-sections do. There are very rare situations where a woman, after even one C-section, it might be advisable to not get pregnant again. But these are extreme. These have to do more with rare heart problems and things like that. So that's an important thing just to put out front. And again, if you look at the medical research, they don't have any evidence to make the claim that you shouldn't have more than 3. These are merely personal opinions of doctors if they say you can't get pregnant again after a 3rd because you have scar tissue or because your uterine wall is thin. So that helps, because that is, and sometimes the highest levels of the church, there's been misunderstandings of that whether it's 5 or 6 or 7, that it would be reckless and irresponsible. This would somehow be an example of irresponsible parenthood to get pregnant again, and that is simply not true.
Well, Pope Francis said it. I was shocked, Dr. Damon, to find what you're saying. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. There's actually, it's more that it's less that there's not evidence for making the claim that multiple C-sections is dangerous, and it's more that they're lying, right? Because when I looked at the actual numbers, after a woman has her first C-section, her odds go up a little bit of future uterine rupture. But right. between the first and the second C-section, yeah, you see a little spike, right? But between the second and the third and the fourth and the fifth and the sixth, I forget how high I looked, but the numbers don't go up much at all after that. It's just after 1, there's a slightly heightened risk.
Right, and that is true. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't point out that, higher, as a woman gets older, there's increased risks of high blood pressure and gestational diabetes, and there's increased risk of miscarriage, and that has to do with the age of the eggs and things like that. But there are unique complications, like a condition called a placenta previa, that are unique to C-section, but those are dealt with in a different way. In the ordinary situation, just having a 7th or 8th pregnancy, is not something that there's evidence, as you concur, as you've also seen, that we should advise it automatically, purely based on that a woman should get pregnant again. So there are, there is a caveat that there are unique risks to high order C-sections, but it's not necessarily catastrophic to the point where we should be, uniformly telling women that they shouldn't get pregnant after a 3rd, for example.
Yeah, thanks again. I wanted to publicly thank you for that, because you gave me so much confidence and peace of mind, especially that last couple of weeks that I was waiting to have my C-section. So
you're welcome,
doctor. The next question is, what are your thoughts on home births?
So it's funny. I'm also known as somewhat of a radical, not only because I don't sterilize women, but I'm very supportive, and I'm willing to bring women to my office to do ultrasounds, even if they're not planning to come to me for delivery. So I'm a friend to the midwife community. Now, I've never witnessed a home birth, but I know many women who have had them, have had good experiences. When my wife and I were pregnant with our first child over 20 years ago, we had taken this class called the Bradley method. And this was started by I think he would have been pro-life if he lived today. His book was called Husband Coach Childbirth. I think you guys would appreciate this. And he really saw the role of the husband as being the primary support person for the woman throughout the pregnancy and labor. And it was a time before that wasn't politically incorrect. But he was an OBGYN, and he didn't advocate home births. He still believed that hospitals were the safest place to have a birth. And I think that is, arguably, I still believe that too, that a hospital is the safest place. I think birth centers are a little bit better equipped than a home. So I work with a midwife that has a birth center, and there's a facility, and she has certain protocols and medications that, and monitoring equipment that may not be as easily brought into the home. So I think that, even again, the secular American College of OBGYN, will still acknowledge that that can be done safely. I think they kind of try to take a little bit of a agnostic approach and not endorsing it, but at the same time, not condemning it. So, but yeah, I'll be the same. I wouldn't, say that it's unsafe. I think for the very low risk patient, for a very competent midwife, that's fine. And I'll just share that when I lived in Pennsylvania before coming here, I was at a Catholic hospital, a very pro-life Catholic practice, and we took care of a lot of Mennonite or Amish, women who primarily did home births. But when they had problems, they would drive some further than we would have liked to them past other hospitals because they trusted us that we were pro-life. We weren't going to sterilize them or do a C-section necessarily.
Okay, great. Thank you. Somebody's asking, is it true that the baby does better after a natural delivery?
There are, benefits to having a vaginal delivery when possible. There's a slight increased risk of what's called transient tachypnea of the newborn. We think that with a vaginal delivery, there's a little better squeeze, kind of squeezing that fluid out of the lungs when the baby's passing through. But more than the baby, it's the mother, really. I mean, I think the benefit to the mother having a vaginal delivery is probably where the big issue is. And so that's why it's worth it to me and for my wife, secondarily, to make the sacrifice of doing, of my, time and attention to whenever possible, allow women to have a vaginal delivery, because particularly with their second pregnancy, and, it's a lot easier on her, the recovery after a seventh, pregnancy if she had a vaginal delivery. And so that first vaginal delivery is important. But yes, there are actual benefits to the baby, for having a vaginal delivery. Now, that said, we've got to be careful because there are times when, we could run the risk of endangering the baby when a C-section might be better for the baby. If the baby truly is hypoxic and losing oxygen, and we have clear evidence based on the monitoring, in those situations, I will do a C-section, immediately, because again, that is a situation where that double effect applies. It is going to cause more harm to the mother, but it's not going to be irreparable harm to the mother. I mean, we're prioritizing in that situation the life of the baby over a relative, a minor increased harm to the mother.
Heather asked, how common by percentage are emergency C-sections in general?
I would look at, so the World Health Organization had found that when C-section rates got beyond 18%, they're about 17%. There wasn't any increase in infant survivability, or there wasn't any decrease in what they call perinatal morbidity and mortality. So more babies, we seem to reach the optimum point of baby safety at about 17%. The C-section rate nationwide in the US at least is close to 40%, high 30s. Many places it's 50%. So there's clearly more done than necessary. Some of those are done because the baby's breech. So in my opinion, this hasn't been, the number of C-sections that really need to be done as an emergency are probably around 10%. And then another 18% for other, medical reasons to require C-section. And many of those might be because the baby's too big, the baby doesn't fit, the baby's in a bad position, and things like that. Or she had a previous 3 C-sections. And, after 3 C-sections is pretty much the set number where, almost every OBGYN would agree that she really can't try to have a vaginal delivery after the 3rd C-section.
Last question, doctor. Somebody's asking, how do pro-life and especially Catholic doctors navigate the issue of contraception and those sorts of issues when dealing with patients?
Can you repeat the last part of that phrase, my question?
Yes, they were just wondering, how does a Catholic pro-life doctor navigate issues of contraception and things that go directly against the faith when you're dealing with your patients?
Oh, very good. So I think that, in my practice, I've been very blessed, and the conviction never prescribed hormonal birth control pill for contraception. There's been rare situations where, like once a year maybe, where a woman who's not in a sexual relationship where there's no issue of contraception or abortifacient effect of the pill. But generally speaking, it's not patients. It's not a hard case to make. When I, just explain to them that I see their fertility as a healthy condition, and the birth control pill is literally like abortion. It harms her health in so many ways. And if she's not married, I don't feel I have a responsibility to help her prevent from getting pregnant. If she is married, there are ways that she can abstain during the fertile time. And with our human intelligence and our modern understanding of fertility, fertility awareness-based, spacing of children is very effective. It's not 100%, but only 2 things are. The only 2 things that are 100% effective at preventing pregnancy are total castration or total abstinence. So,
Neither are popular options.
No, exactly. And for a married person, I would never recommend the latter. And for, anyone without ovarian cancer or testicular cancer, as a male, I'd never recommend the former. However, well, in marriage, there's a time to recommend abstinence after a delivery, after surgery. There's situations where that's definitely appropriate for a season, even, going on weeks, but there's no conflict. There's no conflict of me being able to provide optimal healthcare for women and not prescribing contraception. And women know before they come to me. A woman's not going to wait, 2 months to have an appointment with me, only then to find out that I'm not going to refill a birth control pill. We make it clear up front before they come into the office, so as to avoid any false expectations. But I've been very blessed. Even patients of mine who might otherwise go see someone else for birth control pills, they appreciate, and by reputation, they've heard that I take good care of them. They come to me because they, know they're less likely to have a C-section, or because, they have pain, causing it, with endometriosis causing fertility that other doctors aren't really addressing. So, but yeah, the bottom line is that I believe that I'm able to provide better care for patients by not using birth control pills as kind of the default mode to cover everything. Because there is a caveat I want to say there, is that the use of birth control pills has become sort of the snake oil, of a sense, a cure-all, for hundreds of female medical conditions. It's just the pill is proffered and suggested as a solution. And the reality, as I like to say, is it doesn't really cure any of the problems that it's given with the supposed intention of curing, and many of them it makes worse. Even endometriosis as a cause of pelvic pain, the underlying endometriosis can be made worse while she's on the pill, while it might give a temporary relief of symptoms similar to Motrin. Or polycystic ovarian syndrome, it makes the underlying metabolic problems with PCOS worse, particularly with metabolism, insulin resistance. So I'll just sum it up by saying that, I find that that I'm able to provide best care for patients by not being misled to promoting birth control pills while ignoring the harms that it does to women.
Dr. Damon, as always, it's great to have you on, and I'm sure we'll have you on again. We've discussed
Look forward to it.
In full measure the Dobbs decision from on an OBGYN's perspective, a faithful one. So it's never really full measure, but I really appreciate a lot of your honest answers here today. Thanks a million.
Thank you.
And happy 4th. We'll get
our
family
indeed
together soon here.
Look forward to it.
Yeah, me too. The rest of you, God bless you. God bless America. America's 246th birthday awaits on Monday. Read my Catholic Republic defense piece in 1 Peter 5 that day, and enjoy your families. Enjoy your freedoms daily.